All right, sir. Yeah, I've been thinking about how to roll this conversation out with a guy who's raised me, who's modeled a way of being in the world that has that's allowed me to grow as a man and allowed me to feel love from other men and receive help in ways that have changed my life. You know, starting this whole journey of trying to document really the help that I've received and why it works, how it works, and then try to use some of that experience and the strength and the hope that you've given me and pass it along. Thought a lot about what is the need for this? Like, what are we doing here? What are we doing with our organic men's group, which is what this is born out of, the idea to take this little small collection of guys who are helping each other and learning vulnerability with each other. How do we model that? And why is that necessary right now? And I guess for a minute, maybe we can talk a bit about the need, about the state of men. And, I have my own journey as a boy to a young man to a man that was marked by a lot of hardship, a lot of adversity, and a fair bit of loneliness of just trying to figure out how to move through life in a way that was effective and made sense and didn't leave me in pain, emotional pain in a variety of ways. And I think I'm not alone. I think we're not alone in that. Increasingly, I look around and I see so many men who move through their life alone and don't know who to talk to about the challenges and pressures they feel. They don't know how to talk about it. Even if they've got somebody, the skill of vulnerability is really uncomfortable for many of us. And the skill of parsing out what emotions am I feeling and why am I feeling those, again, that's a skill that wasn't modeled for me. No one taught me how to do it. You taught me. I look around and I see a lot of male anger. I see a lot of male suffering. Pain. Second leading cause of, I think, men between certain age ranges is themselves. There's a suicide epidemic. There's a loneliness epidemic that's talked about to some extent. But I'm not sure what pragmatic help actually exists for men to really get them out of those modes and teach them a skill set, an emotional skill set that allows them to not only heal themselves and grow as men, but then to pass that along, which is where the real fulfillment and joy comes from.
Do you think that most men were taught that in their families of origin?
I know I wasn't. No. The short answer is no. We externalize our well-being in a variety of different ways. But for me, I didn't have an environment that I felt... vulnerability for me growing up was extremely uncomfortable, especially with men. There was an emotional discomfort, an avoidance of it. And it was the attempts that did exist from my father or other well-intentioned men who weren't really modeling vulnerability. They were trying to teach me and instruct me, but there wasn't an unmasking of who they were and of their own humanity, their own imperfection. They didn't unmask the process by which they confronted themselves and then grew through their own shit, their own trial, their own baggage that's often left over from childhood for all of us. We all go through difficult things, and we develop a set of emotional maladaptive copes to deal with those things. And for many men, that looks like avoidance. It looks like man up. It looks like anger. Yeah. Almost all emotion gets distilled down in men to that secondary emotion of anger. And because of that, I think many men just learn to be quiet. They learn to hide. They learn that nobody's interested in hearing about their problems. And if they do have somebody who will hear about them, what do you do about it? How do you actually grow through that? How do you grow after trauma instead of having post-traumatic stress and then avoiding the problem and hiding in a variety of different ways? How do you meet it head on, take it for what it is, and then use it as fuel to help you grow through life? So what's the solution for that? I mean, in a nutshell, for me, the solution has been men who have walked the walk, that have taught me a pattern of vulnerability by modeling it themselves, saying, hey, here I am, here are the faults that I've had in life, and here's the things that I've done. And through modeling that vulnerability, that allows me to have the courage to say, here are the things that I haven't told anyone, or the ways in which I feel unworthy or broken or flawed or unlovable, unacceptable.
I think you make an important point. I don't think that, not just men, but I don't think you can teach anybody anything with words.
Mm-hmm.
I think we teach by behavior, and that other people will see your behavior and say and ask, what is it in that person that allows them to behave in this manner, and then want to begin to pattern their lives after that. And I think that's one of the things that we have started in this men's group.
I mean, a lot of the fulfillment just over the last year in getting to know men and then revealing myself to them the way that you did for me, and then watching those same men open up and reveal their own problems, and then commiserating on how we approach those problems.
I think it's interesting that one of the exercises that we talk about in our men's group is the first thing in the morning. You get up and you look in the mirror and say, I am worthy of love.
Mm-hmm.
I am worthy of respect and compassion. And if you say it often enough, you begin to believe it.
That's one of the keys and blessings that I've taken from our relationship is self-authorship. These internalized beliefs we have that make it uncomfortable for me to get up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, I'm worthy of love. I'm worthy of acceptance. That feels uncomfortable. And there's this element of me that doesn't believe it.
I don't have to hide.
I don't have to hide. That I can intellectually say that, but putting my money where my mouth is, so to speak, and actually believing that and changing my self-beliefs through a pattern of actually changing my life. I can't self-delude and say that, I'm worthy of, I guess as I'm talking right now, I guess I'm worthy of love and acceptance, even if I'm not perfect and my behavior is selfish from time to time.
But it starts at home, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. But that pattern, if you ask most guys who have been doing it their whole life and manning up and meeting their challenges head on, face on, if you ask them to look in the mirror and say, I'm worthy of love and I'm worthy of acceptance, that's a very uncomfortable, cheesy, like, what am I doing with this? How can this actually work?
And why do we hide? I would suggest that we hide because we're afraid that if people were to get to know us, that they wouldn't like us or they wouldn't accept us.
That's right.
And I would respond from a Zen or a Stoic response, that's okay. I don't have to be everybody's cup of tea.
For sure. There's a part of me that knows what other people think of me is none of my business. It reminds myself of that lesson you've taught me many times. What other people think of me is none of my business. Now I can remind myself of that, but the truth is shame runs deep, and it runs deep in humans, runs deep in men. And shame being defined as really two things: the feeling that I am something bad instead of I did something bad. I am something bad. And shame also being the fear of social disconnection. I'm afraid if people found out these things about me, they would judge me, and then ABC would suffer. My business would suffer. My relationships would suffer. People would think, oh, he's not what I thought he was. It is fear-based hiding and lack of self-acceptance. And it keeps many people hiding. It kept me hiding learning the skill of no longer hiding is a skill. And if as a human being, as a man, we have been externalizing our well-being throughout our lives by seeking external validation or praise or accomplishment or accumulation of wealth or resources, ego-driven stuff, we're seeking all of these things as external validation. We're trying to feel better in one of 100 different ways, because who we are internally, who I was internally, and who I still am in certain ways, I don't want to reveal to people. I don't want to experience the fear of rejection. I don't want to say, here I am, this is me, and then somebody say, yeah, pass. That takes courage. That takes the willingness to to stand up and show people who you really are. And if you've been spending your whole life chasing external sources of dopamine or validation to feel better about yourself, that's a habit. And unlearning that hiding habit and masking our imperfection or unmasking our imperfections, first to ourselves and then to others.
I think one of the advantages of working with Zen in our men's group is the idea that the only moment that we have is this moment. And that, the baggage we carry from the past, we can very easily let go of. And that anything beyond this moment is a fantasy. It may not occur.
Mm-hmm.
And by spending time in that fantasy or with your baggage, you don't live. You think you're living, but you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And the closer we get to that understanding, that yes, you have a business and, you want the business to grow, that's good. That doesn't mean, though, that you have any assurance of anything other than what's happening in this moment. And we can get into that in future episodes, but that's a very important thing. We think we have choice. In point of fact, we don't. All we have is this moment.
That took me so many years to internalize and just accept and realize. And even now, it's a practice, as we say. And
yes, our Zen is a practice. One of the funny things that our men's group, and you've heard me say so many times, is can I be present for this moment in my life?
mm-hmm.
Why am I always chasing after fantasies or rabbits?
Mm-hmm. Like you say, what's wrong with this moment?
Yeah.
This one's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Why do I have to live in the one over there and the one behind me?
But that's why we call it a practice. We get better at it.
And that realization for me, another very profound, life-changing thing. I used to live life in the future and see no problem with it, looking forward to the next vacation, looking forward to the next thing I'm doing, living life in the future. They say anxiety comes from living thoughts of the future, living life algorithmically thinking about the future. If this, then that. If this, then that. Sometimes looking forward and people saying no problem to living into the future about their current vacation or about their future vacation. I lived my life that way for a long time, but what I didn't realize was when I'm doing that, what's happening is I'm saying this moment isn't acceptable and I don't like it. So I'm waiting for this more preferable moment. Or it's not important.
Yeah.
Or I can't, it is intolerable in some manner. And so so what I do is I project forward. I use a mind trick to think about the thing that isn't real.
That's
not
the fantasy,
real.
isn't
It's a story
Yeah.
that I'm telling myself about the future. That's a half truth at best because we can't know. And once I realized that anxiety and how many, a third of our population is being treated for anxiety and depression. That's being treated, medications for anxiety and depression, when we're fundamentally, the problem is anxiety is thinking too much about the future or not dealing with past trauma, where it's being stored or recorded in the body in some way. And depression is thoughts of the past. Oh, I wish. I regret this. I regret that.
I shouldn't have said
that.
Or I should have said that.
Or I should have said that. It is lack of acceptance of what was.
Mm-hmm.
And that frame shift and the practice of staying present. I'm getting better now. Again, one of the things that I've learned from a combination of our conversations, stoicism, mindfulness, all of the thought leaders whose names we'll discuss and whose concepts we'll talk about, who have helped me to understand that my thoughts are the problem. Objective reality is very, very rarely the problem. I place on objective reality judgments about what that means. And then in the moment that I do that, I make those judgments reality. I'm convincing myself that that's reality. And then I inherently say, I don't really like that, which is another judgment. And I condition my happiness on my judgments or my wants being met. And I make a contract with myself to not be happy until certain things happen.
As opposed to
Being equanimous.
Being in this moment. Sometimes it's joyful and pleasurable, and sometimes it's not. But what we know for a fact is that the next moment will come. And we are a species that likes to make meaning, and the universe doesn't care. There is no meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Things aren't good and bad until we name them. So, as the old Stoic philosophers would say, something happens. Okay. Don't name it. It's not good, it's not bad, it just happened. If it's one kind of experience, you may not survive. If it's another kind of experience, probably won't last that long. But it's just another experience. And we'll talk more about non-duality as our conversations continue. We are not separate from the universe. We are the universe experiencing itself.
We're getting a little heady. We got to.
Well, we'll get
we'll
to
get
that.
there. We'll get there. And just the tendency to say, think about it. Like, how many of the events in our life that felt like an unmitigated disaster at the time, the way that we met, felt like an unmitigated disaster. Looking back, I can now see a different version of truth, if you will, which is another judgment, but I'm so grateful all of these things happened. They built me. They turned me into whatever it is that I am. And because of all those trials and struggles, I met you. Because of all of that, my shoulders grew. And now my problems aren't any easier, but my shoulders are broader. And I can now see the truth that these things that are challenges in my life, they actually serve to build me. And then the reframing starts. I'm like, okay, I don't need to judge this thing as bad or good. It is what it is. And I can meet it because I've experienced many of these things in the past. So there's a lot of solution that I think we have to talk about over quite a while, because at its heart, what is the fix for shame or for hiding? Well, the fix is connection. The fix is, in the way that you get to connection is vulnerability. And one of the big premises, one of the big things that I've learned through our relationship and through all my relationships is that we learn about ourselves in relationship to other people. Otherwise, we're just in our own head. We're talking to ourselves, telling ourselves stories, giving ourselves beliefs about our life that, again, are partial truths. And it's only when we actually expose our minds to other people that we can have people who love us and who are hopefully experienced say, I don't know if that's actually the right thought. The other day, I was talking to somebody about a mistake I had made in my life, and I said, at some point, I'm going to have to tell people about this mistake I made, and they're going to be like, well, I'm going to have to tell them, look, you know what? I'm not as perfect as you think I am. I'm kind of a dirtbag in certain ways. All right. And then the person stopped me and they said, well, I don't know if calling yourself a dirtbag is actually very accurate. I don't really know that you're a dirtbag. And only in that reframing can I hear, oh yeah, I actually did say that about myself and do feel that way about myself.
As opposed to saying, I made a mistake.
I made a mistake. I learned a lesson that I don't want to learn again.
Sometimes to apologize.
To make amends. When to do so.
So where does this begin? Where does this start?
Where does what start?
Our relationship.
Our relationship. Well, okay. Maybe, why don't we have you start? Who are you? Paul is?
I'm a 76-year-old man nearing the end of his life who really enjoys the company of other people, though I am so introverted that I am most comfortable sitting alone on my sofa. But I enjoy other people, and the process that we have gone through has drawn me out. I'm a student of life. I'm a retired physician. I'm a student of Eastern philosophy, specifically Taoism and Buddhism, and most recently Zen Buddhism. I too had a difficult upbringing that was traumatic in a high demand religion that I've been able to put behind me. I had a lot of baggage, emotional baggage, but I learned to put it down, and I learned that because in my late 40s, I had a substance use disorder. I was an alcoholic, and I was able to get sober. And in sobriety, learned a lot of things, and that's how we met. So that's who I am.
Where were you born?
I was born in the Philippines. My parents were Methodist ministers, both of them, and missionaries. And I actually went to high school at a mission school in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains in India.
What was your upbringing like? Father, warm and fuzzy, mother?
My father was never there. When he was there, he was abusive. My mother I was the youngest of 5 boys, was overwhelmed, trying to raise 5 kids at the edge of the jungle. She was also had many administrative jobs for the mission churches that my father was trying to set up. So it was not good.
So not
warm and fuzzy by any stretch.
Was there any good relationships you had with older men that kind of took you under their wing?
Not until much, much later.
Where was the first time, if ever, that you felt like you encountered men that you could be vulnerable around? Did that ever happen?
Oh, I was hiding so desperately.
Mm-hmm.
One of the interesting stories I have about alcohol, the first time I ever had a drink, I was in high school, and my roommate had some whiskey. He had in a little Gerber jar.
Mm-hmm.
And I took some. I drank some, and that was the first time I ever felt that facade drop.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was to use alcohol continuously until I got sober, because it was the only way that I could, let the facade down and interact with other people. Otherwise, I was,
Mm-hmm.
scared shitless.
When did you come to America?
To go to college.
To go to college, yeah.
Yeah, when I was 18.
18.
Went to college in Virginia, went to medical school at the University of Maryland. Then did my internship and residency in the Army, was in the Army for 10 years.
How do you think it was that your brain as a man, this male sort of, we use the word patriarchal in a way that maybe can fit a little bit of my background and possibly yours.
That's such a beautiful story. So my wife and I have been married for 46 years. So coming out of a very patriarchal family unit and then out of the Army. So I was, dress blues and tennis shoes in the early part of our marriage. Then we got back to the States. We got out of the Army, got to Kenosha in 1985. And after about 5 years, my wife ran to be on the city council. She was an alderman for 10 years. And during that time, she would have to go out, later after the meetings with the boys, and they would discuss city business. Well, that meant that sometimes she wouldn't get home till after midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. So that's the first slip in the patriarchy, I had to be all right with that. And then she ran for Congress twice. And when she was running for Congress, she might be home reliably after 9 p.m. on Sunday night. The rest of the time. Now, I had lots of help. We had this really wonderful couple that was helping me with the kids. We had, I had 3 daughters. But that was the second slip. And, so then the fourth one was it's just easier to be around people if you don't have to maintain a facade, if you don't have to maintain a social structure. If you can actually, look at your wife and, okay, that's what she thinks, good. It might be different than what I think. And finally, it's evolved into just a very deep friendship.
Coming out of this very patriarchal, very male-dominated, it sounds like you had 4 brothers, a dad who wasn't there when he was there, abusive in ways, didn't have a close relationship with him. Did your dad handle stress well?
Oh, no.
What modeling did you see as a man encountering stresses in his life? What did that look like from an early age for you?
He would just get quiet. You asked me earlier about male friends. The only truly male friend I had, and this was after I graduated from college, was one of my brothers was a Marine Corps pilot. And he and I had a very close relationship until he was killed in a plane crash. That was the year I came to Kenosha in 1985.
And you were how old then? 20s?
No,
30s?
I was in my late 30s.
Late 30s.
I was born in 48.
Old. Man, you're old.
Yeah. He was a real, it was interesting. He was a man's man, a Marine. And I was a physician coming from a completely different world. And now I just loved and admired him. And he loved and admired me. And so, like that, until he died. He was the first person I introduced my then. In fact, it was our second date. I took my wife down to Atlanta from Washington, D.C. to meet my brother David and his wife Nancy.
A man's man.
Yeah.
I think that's another point of what we're doing here is to redefine what a man's man actually is. Because I think you and I grew up with what that means. And your brother, this sort of like machismo, I've heard you just describe him before, but also sounds like a lovely human being. Warm,
very kind. Very warm. Very loving. Which
turns out those are very masculine traits that I think don't get a lot of press because we're not really taught how to integrate that stuff as men. Okay, so not a lot of male modeling, not a lot of male vulnerability. Really your blood brother, you had some connection there. Was there a lot of sharing of shared trials, or was it more of just I know this guy loves me and we can talk about some things, but were there areas that you couldn't talk to your brother about these things?
No, but it was more just being in the same room with the guy. It's just a big warm hug. He didn't talk to me about the rigors of being a Marine Corps pilot. I didn't talk to him about the rigors of being a resident in anesthesiology in the Army. We didn't talk about that, but, we could just be together.
Which I think for many men, that's a very, we've talked many times about the way that men build relationships and how that's unique to us versus, our counterparts. Women build relationships face-to-face, talking with each other, building social networks. And I think men often build it shoulder to shoulder and, increasingly face-to-face in a well-integrated man. But how did you face the trials up until your brother died? You had a little bit of male soft spot there, some love, some acceptance, some kindness. Once he dies, how are you facing the challenges as an anesthesia resident, as all of the trauma of your childhood? Is there any attempt to look back and say, man, my childhood was challenging? Or was there not the understanding at that point?
as we will talk about more when we talk about AA, one of the tricks is you put down your bags. The Methodist Church was supposed to give my parents money to help me in college. My dad decided he would take that money and use it instead to help ministers in the Philippines, Filipino ministers, get their seminary degrees. That was a bag it took me many years to put down, that anger. But you know, like in AA, you learn to do that, you know. It's like, and you've heard me use this analogy before, I'm at the train station and I have to get across the train tracks to the other side to pick up my connecting train. And so there's this bridge going over, and I've got these 7 bags.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn to put the bags down. And that there's no benefit in carrying that anger, that shame, that hate, that negative emotion. And it's very cleansing, you know. But in that period from 1985 when I got to Kenosha to when I got into AA, that's when my substance use graduated from, oh, I enjoy this, you know, it helps me socialize, to I need this.
And you know, I think that's a little bit of a good segue to talk about the pressures that we as men, as boys, and then young men, and then men in our teens and our 20s and our 30s and 40s and beyond. As our life evolves, our responsibilities evolve, our capabilities hopefully evolve, which means we have a larger set of problems that are more complicated to deal with. And over time, I think what happens is pressure builds within a man. And there's really nobody, if you have a good spouse, if you're a man with a good friend who's a partner for you to be able to confide in, that can be really helpful. But I think many men reach a point in a relationship where they realize that their primary partner isn't their therapist and cannot give them what they need, can't understand their experience in a way that they can connect to. And so what they do is they begin to stop having honest conversations. They start to just bottle up inside their own pressures, stresses, fears, and they just put one foot in front of the other, and they go to work every day and put food on the table and move forward with life. And they push emotion down. They suppress it. And then the only time that emotion really bottles up or comes out is often in the form of the secondary emotion, anger. And so men try to feel good. They seek sources of comfort, just like women do in every human being. When you're hurting, you look for sources of comfort. And with men who are isolated potentially, and men who don't have good modeling of what healthy male connection looks like from an early age, and they don't know how to actually get the help or to process the emotion or what to do with their problems, especially as they go through the different phases of evolution. Being a young man is very hard, very lonely. You got no experience, you got no money, you got no car or job or whatever. Nobody wants you, you're kind of in the way, you don't know how to do anything. That's hard and isolating and lonely. And so very early in life, I think men begin to shut down honest conversations. They begin to hide. They begin to seek behaviors that make them feel better. They begin to numb, thank you. They begin to numb and disconnect from their emotional experience in one of 100 different ways, either through pursuit, through status, through material accumulation, through identity building. And what happens is those are maladaptive copes that made a lot of sense in our lives, in your life, growing up in an environment. You either
grow up or you die. And not just physical death, emotional, spiritual death.
Grow up or die.
Yeah. And so that crisis where we met was when my growth started.
So before that point, you're leaving
I
the
was
jungles of the
killing myself.
Philippines. You're climbing the social ladder. You're pursuing a plan that you were told would lead to happiness. Go get you a wife, have some kids. Here's the plan. You were following a script to some extent. True or
Except for the
false?
wife part.
Except for the wife part.
I was the luckiest person in the world. I had been married before for 6 years, and we were separated from my first wife, and I were separated. And I was doing a fellowship in pediatric cardiac anesthesia at the Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C. And so I was not a resident, I was a fellow, so I could cover the hospital as the anesthesiologist. So we had a appendectomy at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. So I walk in and I see this woman across the room. And I fell madly, deeply in love. And that was now more than 46 years ago. So, I'm the luckiest guy alive. So she's the thing. That relationship helped me to survive my self-destructive behaviors. I was an angry, bitter, I was killing myself. I believed that I would not live to be more than 50. I was burning the candle at both ends so severely. Then I got to 50, and the answer is, okay, what's next?
And what happened?
Well, that's where the love of a good woman who stuck with me through my maladaptive behavior, of my family, and, the friends I would begin to make and what I would begin to learn in AA. That's what turned my ship around. So that's my story. What's your story?
My story. I think it's true that many human beings go through their childhood encountering emotional difficulties. And they just kind of naturally learn how to survive in whatever emotional situation they're in. If they're in a neglectful situation, they're naturally going to begin to fill some of their own needs. They can't help but not. If they're in a situation that's very controlling, they might naturally begin to withdraw, either physically or mentally, go into their own place, their own world, and withdraw. For me, I grew up in an environment, a very high demand religious environment, similar to you. I grew up in Mormonism, where within Mormonism really, or my particular religious tradition, my well-being, my internal well-being was tied directly to my involvement with this organization. And I really wasn't trained in any way how to be emotionally okay without them as a backstop. And I was taught not only how to be emotionally okay, not alone, but in connection with this group. I was taught to tie my self-worth to it, my sense of self-worth, self-confidence. If my behavior was a certain way as a child or a youth, then I would gain acceptance either with my parents or with my community. And if my behavior was contrary to that, the results were pretty profound and strong. I got a very strong negative reaction from my father. I got an exclusion reaction from my community. We would use words like, you're not worthy. Worthiness, for example, that very simple thing. You're either worthy or you're unworthy. If you engage in these behaviors, you're unworthy. My dad, my relationship with him was not marked by an emotionally mature man who met my bad behavior or my confusion or my imperfection as a male child with tolerance or understanding. It was met with unacceptance and dealt with fairly harshly, which naturally just led me to not seek male attention because it wasn't good. Either at home or at church, I got a series of conditional acceptance and pretty harsh emotional consequences. And I think what happens to many youth is, and to model vulnerability, particularly with boys, as boys are evolving and they start to get through puberty and they start to have sexual thoughts for the first time, and all of a sudden the world is upside down and they now recognize girls for the first time. And then they start to have sexual thoughts. Well, that's very normal. But if you go to a religious context and you tell your pastor or your religious person that you're having these thoughts, I don't know what it's like today, but when I was a kid, you were given all sorts of strategies, first of all, around how to get rid of those thoughts, how to cleanse your mind of those thoughts, how to train yourself to not have them and to not accept them, to sort of push down or suppress.
That's like
part of you.
telling someone not to think about pink elephants.
Right. It didn't work so well, but I sure tried. I gave it my best go. And inherently, like, no matter what strategies they give me to avoid this imperfection, this life thing that's happening to me as a man, as a boy, I would go to an older male who was, in Mormonism they call him the bishop, pastor, our version of a pastor, and I'd tell him, hey, I'm having these thoughts, or I'm touching myself, or very normal things for boys growing up. And the response that I would get was not an older male who would say, hey, no problem, me too, I've been there. That's very normal, you're fine. But you might want to think about these considerations and guide me through sexual maturity from boyhood to manhood. And say, here's what's healthy and here's what's not. Don't beat yourself up about these things, but also don't be selfish. And here's the ways in which you're selfish, your sexual impulse might harm yourself, or in my case, the females that I would be involved with. That conversation didn't happen. It was more an older male telling me why what I was experiencing was not okay and what I could do about it to solve it, to fix it, to correct it. It wasn't modeling this. It wasn't somebody saying, hey, me too. Let me help you figure out how to get around this. And so inevitably, I would take the advice, but fail in some way. I would have another sexual thought or whatever, and feel terrible about myself. And then after 3 or 4 or 5 episodes of this, what do you naturally do? You begin to hide. You begin to say, well, I can't fix this thing. I'm just going to hide it. And that same hiding behavior, that same hiding pattern, we take out of our childhood, and then we find some guy or gal that we want to be involved with, and we don't know how to reveal ourselves or expose ourselves, because as a child, that was not met well. That was not a safe thing to do. So we take these maladaptive hiding behaviors without even knowing we're doing it, and we bring them into our relationships. Mm-hmm. And then we start to slowly reveal ourselves to this other person, just slowly, little experiments in vulnerability, until what? We butt up against some version of ourselves that we're exposing to this other person that they're not okay with. They don't want to see it. Our reaction very commonly to a woman who we show ourselves to, or who doesn't like our behavior, is extreme rejection of that particular piece of us, because it's a threat to them, which that makes sense now. But at the time, it just feels like rejection. You don't really experience it any other way. So what do you do?
Well, and we're not taught as adults or as couples that if we reframe our arguments as this is something we need to work together to resolve, instead of this is what I want to need, that's what you want to need. If we say, whatever the problem is interferes with our ability to work together, how do we fix that? But that takes some maturity.
Well, and I like to get to that level of maturity, to be able to say to somebody else, here's what I need, requires first that I know what I need, which if you're raised in certain situations, being told what you should want and need at all times, and what things to suppress and what things to not suppress, it's expression of what you actually need as a man, I think is very foreign and scary often. And I didn't really understand fully how to do that. And so what happened was I began to hide in a variety of different ways. I would hide if I wasn't happy, for example, with with some sexual component of my relationship with my partner, I wouldn't know how to talk about that per se. I wouldn't know how to express that. And if I expressed it and I was met with any degree of like ick essentially from my partner, well, that shuts me down faster than shame shuts you down and makes you want to hide faster than just about anything. And so slowly as I began to leave my family of origin, which like yours, my dad was not warm and fuzzy. There was a fair amount of physical and mental disconnection from him, physical abuse, neglect. I didn't have healthy male modeling. I didn't know how to seek that. And when I went to seek it in the church setting, it wasn't met by vulnerability and pragmatic advice of what I was experiencing, putting it in the proper context, validating it, connecting with it, and then helping me through it. It was more like, here's what you should do, but I'm not telling you any of my process. I'm just giving you the answers that I'm pretending worked for me. But now as an adult man, I know many of those men were struggling themselves with the same things. And instead of having the courage to be vulnerable and connect with me that way, there was a barrier placed between this potential mentor who could guide me through this hard process of maturing. And
that must have been so disappointing.
It's lonely, isolating. I don't even know if I would say it was disappointing because I didn't know to expect anything else. It's just what was. And so I just kind of went into my own citadel and became my own source of tried to be my own source of soothing. But as I got out of school and began to try to climb the corporate ladder, and I wanted to be, we'll talk about female selection and how male and female selection drives female behavior and male behavior respectively. And I was knowing that I wasn't being picked by girls unless you had certain things that they were looking for, and I began to cultivate the things that I knew made me more attractive. And I don't know that I thought about that. It just was inherently what I think we do as humans. And that led to my stressors and the stresses and pressures of my life increasing through professional school, through college and then professional school. And then I got married and had kids and started to become a dad and learned all of these new roles that I really wasn't prepared for. And while still hiding the whole time, thinking, okay, I can't talk about certain pressures and stresses I'm feeling because that hasn't been met well. And eventually I began to use, just like you, substance because it made me feel better and helped me deal with the cope and the stress. And one of the things I didn't realize was that I was retarding my own maturity. I couldn't mature at the same rate. It wasn't possible because I wasn't actually feeling the emotions or dealing with it and learning the emotional self-soothing skills. So I began to use substances to deal with it, which just kept me stuck. And eventually that broke down and I had to confront that pain. People who loved me confronted me with some things, and fortunately I was in enough pain and desperate enough to make a change that I became willing to seek people who seemed to have some answers, which brought me to you.
One of the things we haven't discussed in the men's group yet, but we will, is the saying, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. If you meet someone who is telling you that this is the program, these are the answers, it's not the program, it's not the answers. What we do is a practice that we get better at. But we'll get to that.
So that, framing of a family upbringing that was not super warm and fuzzy in certain ways was fairly chaotic. I was also 5 kids and mom doing the best she could in a variety of ways, and dad gone. And you were the first person, really, the first man in my life who had the courage in a room sitting like this to tell me, as I revealed some things to you that were very scary for me to reveal about my own humanity and my own imperfection, and you met me with something very different that I had never experienced before.
There's an old saying in AA that if you think that you're the first person that's ever thought this or done this, you're not even in the first million. That there's a humanity and a depth to our self-deception, and a depth to our willingness to traverse and do things that other people don't do because we're using drugs.
And really that's, I think, that's really the story. The story was you taught me because you unmasked yourself and you went through the work and you grew emotionally and you walked a walk. And over a few years, you began to teach me how to do that, how to unmask myself. You created an environment of safety in which I felt like I could do it. And then you modeled the behavior for me time after time and asked me the right questions to help me question my own self-narrative, my own beliefs, my own self-limiting beliefs, and essentially delusions, not connecting with the realities of my life. And then over a decade, we've encountered a whole bunch of different, I think, combination of philosophical and secular ideas that have been profoundly life-changing for me.
And I was growing through the process at the same time.
What a journey.
Yeah.
So using that as a backdrop to talk about all we learned over the last, 13 years, 14 years, you've been raising me. And as our time starts to maybe draw closer to a close, the urgency for me to take over the job of parenting myself, which I think is what every man eventually needs to do, is to learn how to parent himself, to parent that inner child. I hate the word inner child, but let's just use it. It's important. We all have one. And if we're lucky enough, we'll meet a man along our journey, an older man, hopefully, who's been through it a little bit, who will put his arm around you and guide you through life the way that you did me.
I think the whole point of our men's group is the idea that each of us will continue to grow. And as we continue to grow, we then will become the mentors and the masters and can help others. And as I said earlier, this is not a problem most older women have. I mean, they come by this naturally. But so many men are trapped in their lives of despair and hiding and feeling useless.
I remember when I first started deconstructing from Mormonism my belief, there was this Mormon podcaster, one of the first podcasters actually, is a guy named John Dehlin, who started this podcast called Mormon Stories Podcast. And I remember him telling his story about, he starts this podcast and he starts just talking about the very painful process of deconversion and of realizing up is down, black is white, and exclusion from your community, social exclusion from your community without your consent. You don't realize it's happening, but it happens. It's this very painful process that was very lonely and isolating. And he said when he first started talking about it, he popped this balloon, this pain balloon in the sky, and all of this pain started watering down and coming down. And that, I think, is very analogous to what's happening right now in our Western developed culture and society. Men are alone, and there is a balloon to pop, and there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of guys who just don't know how to get the help they need. They're craving something, and they don't know what it is. And I think it is the power of vulnerability and putting men and women, putting people in positions in which they feel safe. They're not going to feel judged. They can say what needs to be said. And then they can have other well-intentioned, loving men
Give them feedback
and help them through life.
Absolutely. So one of the things that one of the reasons that I have centered Zen Buddhism in our practice is we learn in the Four Noble Truths that life is suffering. That's the first noble truth. And the second noble truth is that our suffering is caused by our attachment to things, places, people, outcomes, fantasies,
stories.
And the third noble truth that there is a way out of that suffering, and that is to give up our attachment. And the fourth noble truth is that there is a path, which is called the Eightfold Path. And that as we, as a men's group, start down that path, what is our intention? What is our speech? What is our behavior? And then we begin to look at what we're doing in the men's group through that lens. We begin to see where the things that we are doing right now in the present are interfering with our ability to live, fully present in this moment. And my goal in being part of all of this is that each one person in the group will then be able to take that and transfer it.
I'm excited. I'm excited to go through all we've learned over the last many years and incorporate all of these secular philosophical ideas into hopefully a cohesive and usable body of work that will benefit whoever's looking to grow and evolve. I love you.
I think, it can't hurt.
I love you, my man.
All right.
Until next time.